Welcome to this explainer. Let's dive right in. Today, we're looking at a story that completely changed how the world understands justice, human rights, and state power. It's all about how a single word coined by one incredibly relentless underdog literally altered international law forever. Without this one person, a concept that feels so universally recognized today might never have existed. We're going to unpack exactly how Raphael Lemkin conceptualized the crime of genocide and why the legal origins of this term are still fiercely debated in courts all around the world today.
Think about this for a second. Why is it illegal to kill one person, but not millions? It sounds totally absurd, right? But this was the haunting question that basically consumed Raphael Lemkin when he was a young man. It's a really stark reminder of the deadly absurdity of early 20th century justice. The whole international legal system had this massive blind spot where governments could literally wipe out millions of their own citizens with absolute impunity, while a person murdering their neighbor would be swiftly locked up or executed. It's crazy to think about.
Section 1, the world before the word. So before World War II, there simply wasn't an international legal term for the deliberate destruction of an entire people. I mean, sure, mass killings happened all the time. Colonial massacres, pogroms, wartime atrocities. But international law back then, it was entirely focused on crimes against states or territorial disputes. The dominant legal rule of the day was absolute state sovereignty. Essentially, citizens were legally viewed as the property of the state. The murder of civilians by their own government was just brushed off as an internal matter. A state could persecute or even annihilate part of its own population and legally call it their sovereign right, with zero outside interference. To Lemkin, this doctrine of sovereign immunity was just an absolute moral catastrophe.
Section 2, the man behind the word.
Now, let's talk about Raphael Lemkin. He was a brilliant, multilingual legal mind born in 1900 in the Russian Empire, which is modern-day Belarus. His real intellectual awakening started with a pretty brazen assassination. Back in 1921, an Armenian survivor named Soghomon Tehlirian gunned down Talat Pasha, who was one of the main organizers of the 1915 Armenian mass killings by the Ottoman Empire. And he did this in broad daylight, right on the streets of Berlin. Lemkin watched the trial that followed very closely, and he was struck by this terrifying paradox. Why was Tehlirian being aggressively prosecuted for killing one man, while the actual architect of mass murder got to live freely and comfortably in exile? This contradiction became the absolute fuel for his life's work. By 1933, Lemkin was out there proposing international laws against what he called barbarity and vandalism. But world governments completely rejected him. They were fiercely guarding their sovereignty. They did not want outside interference. Then, in 1939, when the Nazis invaded Poland, the theoretical became devastatingly real. Lemkin had to flee, making this harrowing journey to the United States, while tragically 49 members of his own family perished in the Holocaust.
Section 3, forging a new concept.
While in exile, Lemkin's mission really kicked into high gear. He didn't just mourn, he meticulously analyzed exactly how state-sponsored destruction was being carried out. Fast forward to 1944, and he publishes this massive, deeply researched book called Axis Rule in Occupied Europe. By analyzing Nazi occupation policies, he realized that what was happening wasn't just random violence or large-scale murder. It was a highly coordinated, systemic erasure of identity. To describe this unprecedented horror, he needed a completely new legal framework. So he invented a brand new term. He combined the Greek word geno, meaning race, tribe, or people, with the Latin suffix side, meaning killing, genocide. But, it's really vital to understand that for Lemkin, this concept went way beyond mass graves. It explicitly included the destruction of culture, forced assimilation, economic ruin, and the suppression of language. It was really about the complete erasure of a group's identity from the human fabric.
And that brings us to a major legal misconception that heavily influences how we talk about this today. The popular myth is that genocide just means a mass casualty event or lots of people dying in a war. But legally, the threshold hinges on a highly specific and, honestly, difficult to prove concept: intent. A massive wartime death toll, no matter how incredibly tragic it is, might not legally qualify as genocide if it lacks the specific intent to destroy that group. On the flip side, a smaller campaign with the clear documented intent to systematically destroy a group's identity absolutely does qualify. Intent to erase an identity, not just a really high body count, is the true legal threshold here.
Section 4, the 1948 UN Convention. After World War II, at the famous Nuremberg trials, Nazi leaders were prosecuted for crimes against humanity and war crimes. But genocide still wasn't an official, codified international crime. Completely frustrated by this, Lemkin began an obsessive, relentless lobbying campaign at the newly formed United Nations. He famously cornered diplomats in hallways, lived in near poverty, and just relentlessly badgered world governments to formally adopt his concept. And well, his sheer persistence paid off. In 1948, the United Nations adopted the Genocide Convention, formally defining it as acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. This definition was a massive watershed moment. It finally pierced that historical shield of absolute state sovereignty, making the deliberate destruction of groups an international crime, even if it happened entirely within a sovereign country's own borders.
Now, the UN Convention drew some very specific boundaries. They agreed to protect 4 distinct categories of human groups: national groups, ethnic groups, racial groups, and religious groups. The law explicitly requires the specific intent to destroy these groups in whole or in part. And destruction didn't just mean immediate killing either. It broadly included causing serious bodily or mental harm, imposing measures to prevent births, or deliberately creating destructive living conditions that are mathematically calculated to eliminate the group over time.
But honestly, the real story of the 1948 convention lies in what is missing. Glaringly absent from that protected list are political groups, social classes, and gender groups. Also notably missing is the concept of cultural destruction, things like banning languages, destroying literature, or bulldozing historical monuments. And remember, Lemkin originally considered those things absolutely central to the erasure of a people. This reveals a pretty hard truth for us. International law is rarely born from pure morality. Ultimately, it's a messy, imperfect political compromise.
Section 5. Debating the legal definition.
So why exactly were those groups left out? Well, Lemkin's original vision was expansive. He wanted political groups and cultural destruction covered, but the post-war UN compromise threw them out due to intense paranoia among the drafting states. Historical records actually show that the Soviet Union strongly opposed including political groups. Why? Most likely out of fear that Stalin's purges and the whole Gulag system would immediately invite international prosecution. And they definitely weren't alone in this paranoia. Many Western states also fear that broader definitions could lead to accusations against themselves, bringing unwanted scrutiny over their own colonial policies, segregation laws, or how they treated indigenous populations. So by neutering the definition and narrowing the protected classes, governments basically protected their own sovereignty. This precise compromise is exactly why certain historical atrocities, like the political killings of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, still ignite fierce debates among legal scholars today over whether they technically fit that narrow 1948 definition.
Because of these strict definitions, we really have to recognize how atrocities actually unfold in the real world. Popular imagination often sees genocide as this sudden, rapid event, an explosion of violence out of nowhere. But history shows it's actually a slow, highly calculated bureaucratic process. It starts with legal discrimination and the exclusion of a group from civil society. Then it moves to forced displacement and geographic segregation. After that, it involves family destruction and breaking down social bonds, which ultimately culminates in mass violence. Understanding the slow, step-by-step process helps us realize that atrocity doesn't just happen overnight. It takes real infrastructure, deep planning, and state resources.
Section 6. Why the word matters.
The word genocide is just uniquely powerful. Recognizing it triggers immediate and severe consequences, strict legal obligations under international law to prevent and punish the act, massive political pressure to intervene, and an undeniable moral responsibility on the global stage. This is exactly why you constantly see governments bending over backwards to avoid using the word in modern conflicts. They'll use terms like ethnic cleansing, atrocities, or crimes against humanity just to avoid the specific legal trapdoor that the G word opens. Formal designation forces the global community into action. Legal definitions don't just sit there in dusty textbooks, they literally dictate whether borders are crossed and interventions are launched.
It's so easy to look at history and simply conclude genocide is extreme evil. And yes, obviously it is. But we really need to reframe our understanding here. It is a deeply organized, systemic state action. It relies on bureaucracy, law, propaganda, classification, and deliberate political decision-making. It's not just random, chaotic violence perpetrated by a few bad actors. It's a highly organized machine, engineered by the state itself. Raphael Lemkin believes that protecting human groups was essential to protecting humanity itself. Through sheer persistence and an unwavering belief in international justice, this one man altered the framework of international law forever. So, as we reflect on Lemkin's legacy and look at the conflicts defining our world today, we have to ask ourselves, What responsibilities do our own societies have when governments target vulnerable groups? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking the difficult questions.